Some of the most immediate strategies that we use to cope with grief are avoidance. Avoiding anything that feels like it will remind you of how painful this loss feels for you. And when I say avoidance, that means trying not to think about this person or this experience that you've had that has created loss for you, trying to have no reminders around you, trying to avoid people who might remind you of things. There are all these ways, right, in which we might feel triggered, and we find ourselves trying to avoid these different triggers. Avoidance can look like avoiding things outside of the home. So avoiding areas of town, avoiding certain streets, avoiding certain buildings, anything that feels like it is associated with what this person's life or kind of work might have been. When we think about loss or transitions in other areas of our lives, again, we might associate it with, it might not be something that I did maybe with someone, but something that reminds me of a very hard time in my life. Something that can help us navigate avoidance is actually confronting the idea, the feeling, the thought process that we're trying to not feel at all. Confronting it, although it doesn't sound like it, allows us to really strip it of its power. When we name it, when we acknowledge our sadness and our grief, when we don't pathologize or penalize ourselves for having these very human emotions, right? When we don't put a timetable on our grief by saying, I shouldn't feel sad anymore, I shouldn't feel angry, I should be over it by now. When we actually give our grief room, right, to breathe and room to be whatever it is and room to kind of come in whichever ways it will come in, that allows us to create a different relationship with our grief. And it doesn't mean that grief gets easier. It doesn't mean that grief might go away, but we get stronger at coping with it. We find a different way to kind of place it in our bodies, right? So it doesn't feel like as though it kind of hijacks us as much as it maybe once did. But being able to avoid avoiding the grief actually allows us to create space, right, for the love that we had, for the experience that we had, and for the human experience of moving through really difficult transitions. So we want to look at ways to actually confront and cope with the grief by using our social support system, and sometimes by even seeking the help of a medical professional who can help us understand how our grief is showing up and to help us normalize it and to help us not judge ourselves for having really big feelings about really serious things for us.